The piercing bark shattered the mundane hum of JFK International Airport's baggage claim area. Max, a 6-year-old German Shepherd with the NYPD K9 unit, suddenly lunged forward with such force that his handler, Detective James Walker, nearly lost his grip on the leash. "Max, heel," James commanded, but the disciplined police dog, who had never once broken protocol during his 4 years of service, was now unrecognizable, hackles raised, teeth bared, straining against his collar with single-minded determination toward an ordinary black suitcase sliding along the carousel. Passengers scattered instinctively, creating a widening circle of space around the agitated animal. Airport security personnel moved in quickly, hands hovering near their holsters. But James knew better. In all their years together, Max had never been wrong. The intensity in the dog's rigid posture, the deep growl emanating from his throat, this wasn't aggression. This was detection. "Everyone back," James shouted, scanning the crowded area. His trained eye caught it immediately, a middle-aged man in a gray suit standing too still, face drained of color, eyes fixed not on the commotion but on the black suitcase that Max refused to leave alone. When their eyes met across the terminal, James saw the flicker of panic before the man took one hesitant step backward. The suitcase completed another rotation on the carousel, and Max's barking became frenzied, desperate, almost afraid. Whatever was inside that innocuous piece of luggage had triggered something primal in the veteran police dog, and as security personnel carefully removed it from the carousel, James couldn't shake the feeling that Max hadn't just found contraband. His partner was telling him they'd stumbled upon something far worse. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Detective James Walker had never planned on becoming a K9 handler. At 42, the lines etched into his weathered face told stories of 20 years in law enforcement, the last 15 haunted by the unsolved murder of his younger sister, Caroline. The gold wedding band he still wore 3 years after losing his wife to cancer remained his only personal adornment. Colleagues described him as methodical, relentless, a detective who carried each unsolved case like a physical weight. His superiors recognized his effectiveness but worried about his inability to let go, especially when cases echoed Caroline's murder. James had served with distinction in the Marine Corps before joining the police force, his military precision evident in everything from his crisp shirts to his case notes. But beneath the disciplined exterior lived a man driven by an unquenchable thirst for justice, particularly for victims who, like his sister, risked being forgotten. Max hadn't been destined for police work. The German Shepherd was 18 months old when James found him malnourished and abused during a drug raid. Something in the dog's unwavering gaze spoke to James a resilience that matched his own. Against department protocol, James had rehabilitated Max himself, recognizing something special in the animal's intelligence and intuition. Over 3 years of intensive training, Max had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect human remains, earning him the nickname the Rim Reaper among the K9 unit. While other cadaver dogs required specific training cues, Max possessed an uncanny sensitivity that extended beyond mere scent detection. He seemed to sense emotional trauma lingering in spaces. The bond between man and dog transcended the typical handler relationship. They moved as a single unit, communicated without commands, trusted each other implicitly. Max was more than James's partner. He was the only living being who had witnessed James's rare moments of vulnerability since his wife's passing. The investigation would bring them into the orbits of people whose lives would become irrevocably intertwined with their own. Dr. Emily Bennett, the medical examiner whose own niece had disappeared 3 years prior, bringing personal passion to her forensic precision. Captain Richard Monroe, a political animal pushing for quick case closures ahead of his retirement, constantly pressuring James to follow procedure rather than instinct. Robert Collins, the seemingly ordinary accountant caught transporting the suitcase, whose trembling hands and haunted eyes suggested a man trapped rather than complicit. Looming in the background was Daniel Harrison, a transportation magnate whose charitable foundation work with young women couldn't quite mask the allegations that followed him, allegations that never quite stuck. Margaret Parker, Sarah's mother, whose quiet dignity in her devastation would remind James painfully of his parents after Caroline's death. And Thomas Walker, James's oldest friend since law school, now a high-powered defense attorney whose client list included Harrison, forcing a painful choice between professional ethics and personal loyalty in the investigation ahead. The interrogation room in the airport security wing felt smaller with each passing hour. Robert Collins sat hunched over the metal table, his fingers nervously tracing invisible patterns on its surface. James observed him through the one-way glass before entering, noting the man's expensive watch that contrasted with his otherwise modest appearance. Collins flinched when James placed a photograph of the open suitcase on the table, the antique doll with its cracked porcelain face staring up at them. "I don't know anything about what's inside," Collins insisted, his voice cracking. "I was just paid to transport it." James remained silent, allowing the discomfort to build until Collins continued unprompted. "A man approached me at the Western bus terminal, offered $5,000 to bring this suitcase through customs. Said it contained family heirlooms." When James showed him a driver's license photo of Michael Thompson, Collins's eyes widened in recognition. "That's him, the man who gave me the suitcase." But something was off about him. He moved stiffly like he was injured or ill. What Collins shared next sent a chill through the room. Since accepting the suitcase, he'd been plagued by nightmares of a young woman reaching out to him, but her hand extended in a silent plea for help, her mouth moving without sound. "I thought I was losing my mind," Collins whispered. But now he gestured toward the photograph, unable to finish his sentence. As James pressed further, Collins's demeanor shifted from nervous to defeated. "I know how this looks, detective. But I swear if I'd known what was inside," the man's eyes welled with tears. "I have a daughter her age. I would never." Dr. Emily Bennett worked methodically in the examination room, her gloved hands carefully documenting each aspect of the severed hand before processing for DNA and fingerprints. Female, Caucasian, approximately 20 to 25 years old, she dictated into the recorder suspended above the examination table. Separation appears to have occurred peri-mortem, clean-cut consistent with a sharp, heavy implement. Her assistant photographed the tarnished silver bracelet recovered with the remains, the initials SP barely visible through years of oxidation. James stood silently observing until Emily acknowledged his presence with a grim nod. "I've prioritized the DNA analysis, but I'm already seeing similarities to the Sarah Parker disappearance." Sarah had vanished 3 months earlier after her late shift at a roadside diner off Interstate 95. 22 years old, working to save for nursing school, no history of running away or substance abuse. James reviewed his notes, remembering the security footage showing Sarah climbing into a long-haul truck. The driver, Michael Thompson, had been questioned but released due to lack of evidence, claiming he'd dropped her at a rest stop as requested. 2 months later, Thompson died when his truck veered off a bridge during a rainstorm at 1:30 a.m. "The timing works," James muttered, spreading out the case files on the adjacent table. His phone vibrated, Captain Monroe demanding progress. James texted back a brief update before returning to Emily. "Time of death?" She frowned, examining tissue samples under the microscope. "Based on decomposition rate, I'd estimate 3 to 4 weeks, but..." She hesitated. "Something's not right. The preservation is unusual. I need to run more tests." James's attention shifted to the doll, now sealed in an evidence bag. "And this?" Emily's expression darkened. "Antique German porcelain, probably 1920s. Someone modified it specifically to conceal the hand. This wasn't opportunistic, it was planned." As James prepared to leave, Emily called after him. "James, the wound patterns, they remind me of 3 other unidentified remains in our system." A cold certainty settled in his gut. This wasn't an isolated case. James returned to his apartment, well after midnight, Max padding quietly beside him. The dog's routine was unwavering, a careful inspection of each room before settling at the foot of James's bed. But tonight Max remained alert, sensing his handler's distress. James spread the case files across his kitchen table, pinning photos and timelines to a corkboard. Sarah Parker's smiling face looked out from her college ID photo, brown hair, bright eyes, a hopeful expression so reminiscent of Caroline that James had to look away. The similarities were undeniable, both young women with promising futures, both vanishing without witnesses, both connected to isolated locations. As he reviewed Thompson's accident report, inconsistencies emerged. No skid marks indicating braking. No mechanical failures. Toxicology initially overlooked due to the obvious nature of the accident. James made a note to request a full panel. His phone rang Captain Monroe again. "Walker, I'm reassigning the case to Henderson." James's grip tightened on the receiver. "Sir, with respect, this isn't a request, Walker. You're too close to this one. The similarities to your sister are precisely why I should lead the investigation." The ensuing silence stretched painfully before Monroe sighed. "You have 72 hours to show progress before I make the transfer official." James hung up, turning back to the board where he'd just added a new element, a newspaper clipping about Daniel Harrison's transportation company, which had employed Thompson for 8 years. Witness statements from the diner mentioned a wealthy regular who had repeatedly harassed Sarah, a man matching Harrison's description who always arrived in a company car with a sign. Personal driver, though never directly named. The description and timing aligned perfectly. James stepped back, the larger pattern emerging before him. Caroline, Sarah, how many others? Max whined softly, nudging his hand as if sensing the ghosts gathering around them. "I know, boy," James whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. "We'll find her." But a voice in the back of his mind, the voice that had haunted him since Caroline, whispered back, "You'll find what's left of her. And even that won't be enough." Margaret Parker's modest suburban home stood frozen in time, a shrine to the daughter who never returned. James removed his hat as she welcomed him inside, Max waiting obediently in the car. Framed photographs lined the entryway, chronicling Sarah's life from gap-toothed elementary school portraits to her college graduation. "She worked so hard for that degree," Margaret said, noticing his gaze lingering on the image of Sarah in cap and gown. "Business administration. She only took the diner job to save for nursing school." She led him to a living room where 3 months' worth of newspapers sat in neat stacks, each containing any mention, however small, of her daughter's case. James recognized the behavior. His parents had done the same after Caroline disappeared. When he carefully placed the evidence bag containing the silver bracelet on the coffee table, Margaret's composure crumbled. "That's hers," she whispered, not touching it but leaning forward as if it might somehow still contain her daughter's warmth. "A 16th birthday gift. She never took it off." James gently explained the circumstances of its discovery, omitting the more gruesome details. Margaret listened with the stoic dignity of someone already acquainted with worst-case scenarios. "I knew she wasn't coming back," she said finally. "A mother feels these things." She disappeared into Sarah's untouched bedroom, returning with a small leather-bound journal. "The police took her phone, her laptop, but they missed this." James accepted the diary, opening to pages where Sarah had documented increasing harassment from a customer she referred to only as DH. The final entry, dated 3 days before her disappearance, read, "DH waited in the parking lot again tonight. Said he could make or break my future. I'm scared to tell anyone who would believe me against someone like him." As James prepared to leave, Margaret clutched his arm. "There's something else," she confessed. "Since Sarah disappeared, strange things have been happening. Items moving, lights turning on. Last week I found her favorite mug filled with hot coffee on the counter when I woke up." She looked away, embarrassed. "The police think I'm just a grieving mother imagining things." "Maybe I am. But sometimes I swear I can feel her in this house, Detective Walker. Like she's trying to tell me something." The landlady's keys jangled as she unlocked the door to Sarah's former room in the old converted dormitory. "Nobody stays here long anymore," she explained, stepping aside to let James and Max enter. "They all complain about the same things, nightmares, feeling watched, waking up unable to move." The small room was sparsely furnished, a twin bed, desk, and dresser filling the limited space. Max entered cautiously, his usual confidence replaced by uncharacteristic hesitation. The dog circled the room before stopping abruptly near the bed, a low whine building in his throat. James followed, crouching to examine what had caught the dog's attention. Deep gouges marked the wall beside the bed, 10 parallel lines scored into the plaster fingernail marks from someone desperately clawing at the wall. These weren't here when she lived here, the landlady insisted, crossing herself. The girl who stayed after her chin, I think her name was, she left in the middle of the night. Said someone was sitting on her chest every night, watching her. James ran his fingers over the marks, measuring their height and angle. They matched the reach of someone lying on the bed, arm extended. As he stood, a cold sensation washed over him, raising goosebumps despite the stuffy warmth of the room. Max pressed against his leg, trembling slightly, something James had never witnessed from his fearless partner. "Has anyone else reported seeing a young woman around the property? Maybe someone who resembles Sarah?" The landlady hesitated. "The security guard mentioned something last month. Said he saw a girl walk in the halls after midnight, long brown hair, white shirt. When he called out, she disappeared around a corner. He quit the next day." James took photographs of the scratch marks and collected trace evidence, though he doubted they would yield actionable results. As they prepared to leave, Max suddenly froze, staring intently at an empty corner of the room. The dog's ears flattened against his skull, a posture James recognized from cadaver searches. But there was nothing there, just empty space and shadow. "Come on, Max," James called, his voice sounding strange in the heavy silence. The dog hesitated, still fixated on the corner, before reluctantly following his handler out of the room. The break-in was clean and professional, no fingerprints, no forced entry, nothing obviously disturbed in James's apartment. He might not have noticed at all if not for Max's behavior. The normally disciplined dog raced from room to room upon their return, hackles raised, inspecting every corner and doorway. James drew his service weapon, following the dog's lead through the familiar space that suddenly felt violated. Nothing appeared to be missing. His case files remained untouched on the kitchen table. But taped to his bathroom mirror was a newspaper clipping he hadn't seen before, an obituary for Michael Thompson, with the words "accidents happen" written across it in red marker. He carefully preserved the note as evidence, then began a methodical sweep for listening devices or cameras. He found nothing, which somehow felt more unsettling than confirmation of surveillance. An hour later, as James sat reviewing security footage from his building's lobby, Max's behavior changed again. The dog positioned himself protectively between James and the apartment door, growling low in his throat. James muted the television, listening intently. Footsteps in the hallway paused outside his door, followed by the soft sound of paper sliding underneath. Drawing his weapon again, James approached cautiously. A plain white envelope lay on the floor, his name typed on the front. Inside was a single photograph, James leaving Sarah Parker's house earlier that day, in a handwritten note. "Some questions are better left unasked, Detective Walker." For everyone's sake. James stared at the photograph, noting the high angle and distance that suggested professional surveillance equipment. His phone rang, Captain Monroe's name flashing on the screen. James silenced it, turning instead to the window where he observed a black sedan with tinted windows idling across the street. When he blinked, it was gone. Whether real or imagined, the message was clear: someone wanted him off this case, which only strengthened his resolve to pursue it. Max remained vigilant at his side, sensing danger that couldn't be seen but was palpable in the stillness of the apartment. In that moment, James knew with certainty that he had stumbled into something far larger and more dangerous than a missing persons case. Like the scratches on the wall in Sarah's room, he was seeing only the desperate surface marks of something much darker beneath. The medical examiner's office was silent except for the rhythmic hum of equipment and the occasional turning of pages as James reviewed Michael Thompson's revised autopsy report. Dr. Emily Bennett had prioritized the toxicology screening at his request, her findings confirming his suspicions. Thompson's blood work showed high levels of zolpidem, a powerful sedative typically prescribed for insomnia at concentrations inconsistent with therapeutic use. The original me missed it because they were looking for alcohol and common drugs of abuse. Emily explained, highlighting relevant sections of the report. Given the presence of partially digested food in his stomach, I'd estimate he ingested the sedative approximately 30 to 45 minutes before the crash. James studied the accident scene photographs with fresh eyes, the lack of skid marks, the perfect angle of descent over the bridge railing, the absence of mechanical failure. This wasn't an accident, he concluded. Thompson was incapacitated deliberately. Emily nodded, pulling up additional files on her computer. I took the liberty of checking unsolved cases with similar patterns. In the past 5 years, 3 long-haul truck drivers have died in single-vehicle accidents within a 100-mile radius. All ruled accidental, all without obvious external cause. James leaned forward, scanning the information. Any connection to Harrison Transport? Emily hesitated. 2 of them had applied for positions with the company but were rejected. The third had recently quit working for them. As they compared timelines, a pattern emerged. Each driver's death had been preceded by the disappearance of a young woman along their route. James assembled a map marking the locations, the invisible threads between them becoming increasingly clear. When his phone rang, Captain Monroe's irritation was palpable even through the brief text message, "My office." Now, James ignored it, focusing instead on Thompson's phone records. In the week before his death, Thompson had made multiple calls to a burner phone purchased with cash at a convenience store. Security footage showed Thompson appearing agitated, glancing repeatedly over his shoulder as if expecting to be followed. He knew something, James murmured. Whatever it was got him killed. As Emily continued cross-referencing data, James received an email that made his blood run cold. Sarah Parker's DNA had been officially confirmed from the severed hand. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. In that moment, the investigation transformed from a missing persons case into a homicide, with Michael Thompson shifting from suspect to potential victim in a larger conspiracy that seemed to spiral outward with every new piece of information. Daniel Harrison's business empire sprawled across the East Coast, his transportation company merely the most visible of his numerous holdings. From his office overlooking the harbor, James could see Harrison Transport's fleet of trucks lined up at the loading docks, their distinctive logo gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Mr. Harrison is currently unavailable," his executive assistant repeated for the 3rd time, her professional smile never wavering. "He's attending a conference in Singapore and won't return until next week." James left his card anyway, knowing Harrison would never call. Back at the precinct, he assembled a task force to dig deeper into Harrison's background, assigning officers to investigate his financial records, travel history, and personal connections. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. Over a 12-year period, 7 young women had filed harassment complaints against Harrison, all eventually withdrawn. 5 former employees had attempted to sue for wrongful termination after reporting inappropriate behavior. All cases settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. Most concerning were the geographical connections. Harrison's travel schedule overlapped with the disappearances of 4 women in the past 3 years, including Sarah Parker. He was a regular at the diner where she worked, Officer Rodriguez confirmed, reviewing witness statements. Always requested her section, always stayed until closing. Despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, there was nothing concrete enough for an arrest warrant. Harrison's team of lawyers had constructed an impenetrable shield around him, designed to deflect precisely these types of allegations. James's breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Harrison's former chauffeur, now working as a parking attendant after being fired for insubordination. The man described late-night drives to remote locations where Harrison would meet with business associates. Not listed in any official capacity. "There was one night I'll never forget," he told James, voice lowered despite the empty parking garage where they met. "About 4 months ago. Mr. Harrison had me drive him to that diner off I-95. He was furious about something, kept making phone calls. When we arrived, he told me to wait in the car. He went inside for about 20 minutes. When he came out, he was smiling. Said something like problem solved into his phone. The date matched Sarah's last shift before her disappearance. As James compiled the evidence for a search warrant, notification came through that Harrison had abruptly left Singapore, his private jet filing a new flight plan to Bangkok. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental somehow. Harrison had been tipped off about the investigation. The small conference room at the Waldorf Astoria felt impossibly tense as James faced Thomas Walker across the polished mahogany table. Their 30-year friendship from boyhood neighbors to college roommates now strained to breaking point by the manila folder James slid across the surface. "You're representing him," James stated flatly, not a question but an accusation. Thomas didn't touch the folder. "Client confidentiality, James. You know I can't discuss Harrison with you." The attorney looked tired, the circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights that matched James's own. "This isn't about attorney-client privilege, Tom. This is about 6 missing women, possibly more. This is about Sarah Parker's hand being smuggled through JFK in a child's doll." Thomas flinched slightly but maintained his professional composure. "If you have evidence, file charges. Otherwise, this conversation is inappropriate." James leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Do you remember what you said at Caroline's funeral? That if you ever had the chance to help catch someone like her killer, you'd do whatever it took." Thomas stood abruptly, straightening his custom suit. "That's not fair, James. None of this is fair. Sarah Parker was 22 years old. She wanted to be a nurse." The silence stretched between them, decades of shared history crashing against the immovable object of professional ethics. Finally, Thomas gathered his briefcase. "I have to go. I'm due in court." At the door, he paused without turning around. "Check Harrison's connection to Eastland Shipping. That's all I can say." He left James sitting alone, contemplating both the fractured friendship and the unexpected lead. The investigation took another unexpected turn that evening when James received a call from Robert Collins' assigned attorney. Collins had attempted suicide in his holding cell, leaving behind a handwritten confession claiming sole responsibility for Sarah Parker's death. James rushed to the hospital where Collins was under guard, recovering from his wounds. The confession made no sense. Details were wrong, timeline impossible, motivation absent. When Collins regained consciousness, his first words to James confirmed what he already suspected. "They have my daughter. Said they'd send her back in pieces if I didn't sign that paper." Collins's hands trembled as he gripped James's sleeve. "I need to tell you something. I'm not who you think I am." He took a shuddering breath. "My real name is Robert Parker. I'm Sarah's father." James stared at the man in disbelief as Collins Parker continued. "I abandoned Margaret and Sarah 15 years ago. Couldn't handle the responsibility, started drinking. By the time I got myself together, Margaret had changed their names, moved away." Tears streamed down his weathered face. "I've been searching for them for years. When I finally found Sarah working at that diner, I couldn't bring myself to approach her. Just watched from a distance, trying to work up the courage." The revelation transformed everything. Collins wasn't a random courier, but a father unknowingly carrying his own daughter's remains. "I recognized her bracelet in that photograph you showed me," he whispered. "The one I gave her for her 16th birthday before I left." That's when the nightmares started making sense. "She's been trying to tell me something, Detective. My daughter is trying to reach me from beyond the grave." The international manhunt for Daniel Harrison unfolded across Southeast Asia with methodical precision. Interpol agents in Thailand confirmed that Harrison had stayed at the Peninsula Bangkok for exactly 48 hours before vanishing again, leaving behind laundered clothes and a generous tip for housekeeping. James coordinated with local authorities from his makeshift command center in the precinct, walls now covered with photographs, timelines of phone and string connecting seemingly disparate elements of the case. "He's following a pattern," James explained to the assembled task force, tracing Harrison's movements on a large map. 48 hours in each location, never using credit cards, always staying at 5-star hotels using different aliases. Singapore, Bangkok, Phnom Penh, Each stop meticulously planned, each departure timed to stay ahead of authorities. "He's not running scared," Captain Monroe observed, surprising James with his support after initially opposing the international scope of the investigation. "This is practiced, rehearsed." Financial analysts uncovered a complex network of offshore accounts that had been activated in sequence as Harrison moved, funds transferring through shell companies registered in tax havens across the globe. The sophistication suggested long-term planning rather than a panicked escape. When facial recognition software identified Harrison at a private airfield in Cambodia, he wasn't alone. Security footage showed him accompanied by a well-dressed man identified as Lawrence Eastman, CEO of Eastland Shipping. Thomas Walker's cryptic hint suddenly gained significance. Further investigation revealed that Eastland's cargo ships regularly transported Harrison transport containers through international waters with minimal customs scrutiny, thanks to high-level connections in multiple governments. "We're not dealing with a lone predator," James told Emily Bennett as they reviewed the expanding evidence board. "This is organized with infrastructure and protection." Emily nodded grimly, sliding a folder toward him. "And Sarah Parker wasn't his first victim. DNA comparison found matches to 3 cold cases in our database, all young women reported missing near Harrison transport routes over the past decade." James studied the photographs, different women with different backgrounds, connected only by their disappearances and now by the man who had employed their likely killers, as the net tightened around Harrison's international movements. Troubling reports surfaced of witnesses suddenly recanting statements or disappearing themselves. Someone with considerable resources was actively obstructing the investigation, reaching across borders to eliminate threats. Harrison's carefully constructed escape route suggested not only extensive planning but also inside knowledge of law enforcement procedures. Someone was feeding him information. James ordered a communications blackout for the task force, limiting case details to in-person briefings only. 3 days later, Interpol agents raided Harrison's hotel suite in Hong Kong, and missing him by mere hours, but seizing laptops and documents that proved to be the first concrete evidence linking him directly to a trafficking operation spanning multiple countries. Max's behavior changed the moment they approached the abandoned farm property. The German Shepherd, typically disciplined and methodical during searches, became agitated, pulling James toward the weathered barn rather than the main farmhouse that the rest of the search team was approaching. James had learned to trust his partner's instincts, radioing for backup as he followed the dog's lead. The property had emerged as a location of interest after financial records showed Harrison had purchased it through a shell company 5 years earlier, despite it having no apparent connection to his business operations. The barn's exterior appeared unremarkable, its red paint faded and peeling, but Max circled the concrete floor with growing intensity, scratching at a specific section near the back wall. "We need ground-penetrating radar here," James called to the forensic team, marking the area with spray paint. While technicians set up their equipment, James examined the structure itself, noting newer hinges on an otherwise ancient-looking door leading to a root cellar. The door was secured with a modern padlock incongruous with the rusted hardware surrounding it. When the lock was cut and the door swung open, the beam of James's flashlight revealed steep stairs descending into darkness. The air that rushed up from below carried a distinctive chill that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. Max whined but pressed forward, leading the team down the narrow staircase into a concrete chamber that extended far beyond what the cellar's exterior dimensions suggested. Motion-activated lights flickered on automatically as they entered, revealing a space that had been carefully designed and soundproofed. Against one wall stood metal shelving containing plastic storage containers neatly labeled with dates. The forensic team worked methodically, photographing everything before disturbing the scene. When the first container was opened, the contents confirmed their worst fears: women's clothing, jewelry, and personal items cataloged with clinical precision. "These are trophies," Emily said quietly, examining the items through her gloved hands. James recognized a blue scarf from one of the earlier missing persons reports, carefully preserved in its container. The methodical storage suggested a collector rather than a disorganized killer, someone who revisited these items regularly. The search expanded to a hidden door at the back of the chamber, revealing a smaller room containing video equipment and hard drives. Technical specialists immediately began securing the digital evidence, their expressions grim as the extent of documentation became apparent. In the final container, marked with the most recent date, they found Sarah Parker's nursing school application half completed, alongside her wallet and cell phone. As the evidence collection continued, Max led James to a section of wall that appeared solid but sounded hollow when tapped. Behind a carefully disguised panel, they discovered a narrow space containing a mattress, chains bolted to the wall, and scratch marks identical to those in Sarah's rented room. The message became horrifyingly clear: this wasn't merely a storage facility, but a prison that held multiple victims, one after another, over the course of years. Outside in the fresh air, James braced himself against the barn wall, the weight of what they'd discovered settling like lead in his stomach. Captain Monroe approached, his earlier skepticism replaced by grim determination. We found more buildings on the property with similar setups. This wasn't the work of one man, Walker. This was an operation. Robert Parker's eyes never left the monitor displaying real-time surveillance of his hotel room. The operation had been James's idea, using Harrison's predictable pattern of eliminating witnesses against him. Parker had agreed to the risk immediately, desperate for redemption after years of absence from his daughter's life. "You understand what we're asking?" James had explained during the briefing. "We need you visible, vulnerable. If Harrison's people are watching, they'll see an opportunity." Parker had nodded, a new steadiness in his formerly trembling hands. "I understand. Whatever it takes to find who did this to my daughter." Now, as Parker sat alone in the hotel room pretending to write his confession, James and his team monitored from an adjacent suite. 3 hours into the operation, the elevator camera caught movement: a hotel maintenance worker approaching Parker's room with a pass key, his cap pulled low over his face. "That's not hotel staff," Officer Rodriguez confirmed after checking with management. James watched the man's movements, noting the unnatural bulge under his uniform jacket, armed, possibly with a suppressed weapon given the confidence with which he approached the door in a public hallway. "Move in on my signal," James instructed the tactical team positioned at both ends of the hallway. As the man entered Parker's room, cameras captured the swift change in his demeanor, the careful closing of the door, the removal of the disguise, the withdrawn weapon. James gave the signal seconds before the man reached Parker, who was sitting with his back to the door as instructed. The tactical team breached with precision, subduing the assailant before he could fire. In the chaos of the arrest, James focused on the man's face, immediately recognizing him as Edward Bates, Harrison's personal security chief, who had been photographed accompanying him at several international locations. The trap had worked, yielding not only an arrest but a direct connection to Harrison himself. In the interrogation room, Bates maintained stubborn silence despite the evidence stacked against him: the weapon with his fingerprints, the surveillance footage, the forged hotel credentials. It was only when James presented photographs of the underground chamber at the farm that the first cracks appeared in his composure. "You think I knew about that?" Bates asked, genuine revulsion crossing his features. That wasn't the arrangement. James seized on the opening, building rapport over the next several hours as Bates gradually revealed his limited knowledge of the operation. "I handled security, transportation, made problems disappear. But Harrison kept the other part separate." According to Bates, Harrison maintained a strict compartmentalization of his criminal activities, with different teams handling different aspects: recruitment, transport, disposal, no single person knowing the entire operation except Harrison himself and whoever stood above him. The confirmation that Harrison answered to someone else sent the investigation in a new direction, as Bates revealed meetings with an individual he had only ever heard referred to as the director. The breakthrough came when Bates, facing multiple murder charges and seeking consideration, offered information on Harrison's emergency extraction protocol, a yacht registered to Eastland Shipping currently moored off the coast of Vietnam, waiting to transport him to a private island beyond extradition treaties. As international authorities mobilized to intercept the vessel, satellite imagery confirmed movement consistent with Bates's information. For the first time since the investigation began, James felt the balance shifting in their favor, the net tightening around a man who had evaded consequences for too long. But the nagging question remained: who was directing Harrison's operation, and how far did their influence extend? The digital forensics team worked day and night to recover data from the hard drives seized at the farm. On the third morning, their lead technician requested James's presence immediately, her voice uncharacteristically shaken over the phone. In a darkened room illuminated only by computer screens, she showed him what they had found: meticulously organized video files dating back nearly 7 years, each labeled with initials and dates. "We've identified footage of at least 11 different women," she explained, opening a secured folder, including Sarah Parker. James steeled himself as the technician played a segment from Sarah's file. The timestamp showed a date 3 days after her disappearance. The video quality was professional grade, capturing Sarah in a confined space similar to the hidden room they'd discovered. She appeared disoriented but alert, speaking directly to an off-camera interviewer whose voice had been digitally altered. "Please," Sarah's voice cracked through the speakers, "I didn't see anything. I don't know what you're talking about." The interviewer asked methodical questions about what Sarah had observed at the diner, specifically regarding documentation she may have photographed. The revelation stunned James. Sarah hadn't been randomly targeted. She had witnessed something specific. The technician opened another file containing photographs recovered from a hidden folder. They showed Sarah at the diner, surreptitiously using her phone to capture images of documents spread on a table during a meeting between Harrison and several unidentified men. She wasn't just a waitress, James realized. She was investigating them. Further files revealed Sarah's private email correspondence with a journalism professor at her former college. She had noticed discrepancies in shipping manifests while serving Harrison's regular table cargo numbers that didn't match official records, destinations that changed between document versions. The professor had encouraged her to gather evidence carefully, promising to connect her with a trusted investigative reporter once she had sufficient documentation. Sarah had been building a case against Harrison's operation, unaware of how closely she was being watched. The final video in her file, dated 1 week after her disappearance, showed Sarah looking directly into the camera, her face bruised but her voice steady as she recorded what she believed would be her final testimony. "My name is Sarah Parker. If you're seeing this, I'm probably dead. Everything I've discovered about Daniel Harrison's shipping operation is hidden in a secured email account." She provided the login details before the video cut abruptly. James immediately dispatched officers to access the account, finding it still active and containing dozens of photographs, notes, and recorded conversations, a comprehensive documentation of Harrison's illegal activities that Sarah had methodically compiled over months. She hadn't been a helpless victim, but a determined whistleblower who had sacrificed her life to expose a criminal enterprise that extended far beyond one man's depravity. The evidence she'd gathered implicated government officials, customs agents, and corporate executives in a sprawling network of human trafficking, drug smuggling, and money laundering. Sarah Parker had uncovered something far more dangerous than she could have imagined, and it had cost her everything. The attack came without warning as James walked Max toward his apartment building. The black SUV accelerated silently from a side street, mounting the sidewalk directly in their path. James registered the danger too late, diving aside as the vehicle struck a glancing blow to his side, sending him tumbling across the concrete. Max reacted instantaneously, lunging toward the vehicle as a man emerged from the passenger door, weapon raised. James heard the distinctive pop of a silenced handgun, followed by Max's agonized yelp. Ignoring the searing pain in his ribs, James drew his service weapon and returned fire as the SUV accelerated away, bullets shattering its rear window before it disappeared around a corner. He crawled to where Max lay motionless on the pavement, blood pooling beneath the dog's powerful body. "Stay with me, boy," James pleaded, applying pressure to the wound as he called for emergency assistance. The veterinary trauma team worked on Max for 4 hours while James paced the waiting room, his own injuries bandaged but forgotten in his concern for his partner. The bullet missed his vital organs, the veterinarian finally reported, but he's lost a significant amount of blood. The next 48 hours will be critical. As Max was transferred to intensive care, James received a call from Captain Monroe. "Walker, what the hell happened?" Before James could respond, Monroe continued, "Never mind. You're off the case, effective immediately." James protested, but Monroe's decision was final. "This isn't a request, it's direct from the commissioner. There's a conflict of interest investigation pending against you." The accusation blindsided James. Someone had filed a formal complaint alleging he had tampered with evidence to frame Harrison, citing past trauma from his sister's unsolved murder as motivation for a vendetta. His service weapon and badge were surrendered pending internal review, his access to the precinct restricted. The orchestrated attack effectively sidelined him at the critical moment when Harrison's operation was most vulnerable. From his hospital bed, Robert Parker watched the news coverage of James's suspension with growing dismay. "They're shutting down the investigation," he told Margaret, who had reluctantly agreed to meet with her ex-husband after learning of his cooperation with the police. "All because we were getting too close." Margaret studied the man she had once loved, the father who had abandoned their daughter. His face bore new lines carved by grief and regret, his eyes haunted by the same loss that hollowed her own. "Sarah always was stubborn," she said quietly. "Just like you. It was the closest thing to forgiveness she could offer." Parker reached tentatively for her hand, surprised when she didn't pull away. "I keep thinking about what she discovered," he said. "How brave she must have been. All those years I wasn't there to see the amazing woman she became." Margaret's tears fell silently as she shared stories of the daughter he had missed, her determination, her compassion, her dream of helping others. Through their shared grief, a fragile connection formed between two people who had loved and lost the same remarkable young woman. As daylight faded outside the hospital window, they began planning how to continue what Sarah had started, determined that her sacrifice would not be in vain, even as official channels abandoned the pursuit of justice. The memorial service for Sarah Parker and the other identified victims drew hundreds of attendees to the lakeside park where Sarah had often studied. James attended in civilian clothes, still suspended but unwilling to miss the opportunity to honor the young women whose cases had consumed his waking hours. Max remained in veterinary intensive care, his condition stabilized but recovery uncertain. The families of victims sat in a reserved section near the front, mothers, fathers, siblings united by an unimaginable loss. White roses were distributed, one for each confirmed victim and additional flowers for those still missing. Margaret Parker stood at the podium, her quiet dignity commanding attention as she addressed the gathering. "My daughter Sarah was not just taken from us," she began, her voice steady despite her grief. She was silenced while trying to expose a terrible truth. "Today we speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves." Each family representative came forward to share memories, creating a mosaic of lives cruelly interrupted, birthdays never celebrated, graduations never attended, futures never realized. When it was Robert Parker's turn to speak, he approached the podium with visible trepidation, aware of the whispers that followed him. "I wasn't there for Sarah when she needed me in life," he acknowledged, voice breaking. "But I promise to be there for her now, in death, to ensure that those responsible face justice." His raw honesty silenced the murmurs, his obvious pain transcending judgment. After the formal service, as mourners placed their roses on the memorial, James noticed the commissioner approaching with Captain Monroe. Their expressions suggested this wasn't a social courtesy. "Detective Walker." The commissioner began, "Your suspension stands until the review board's decision next week." His tone softened slightly. "For what it's worth, I don't believe the allegations, but procedure must be followed." As they walked away, James felt a presence beside him, Thomas Walker, attending despite his professional connection to Harrison. "I heard about Max," Thomas said quietly. "I'm sorry, James." The tension between them remained palpable, years of friendship straining against the barrier of Thomas's professional obligations. Neither man spoke for several moments as they watched Margaret and Robert Parker supporting each other beside the lake, united in grief for the daughter they had both lost in different ways. "Do you remember what your father told us after Caroline died?" Thomas finally asked. James nodded, recalling the advice that had led him to law enforcement. Some battles choose you, not the other way around. "Harrison is just one part of this," James said, keeping his voice low. "Someone higher up is protecting the operation." Thomas adjusted his tie, an unconscious gesture James recognized from their college days. His friend was making a difficult decision. "I know," Thomas replied, his gaze fixed on the memorial. "And I think I know who." Before James could respond, Thomas walked away, leaving him to wonder whether his oldest friend had just offered an olive branch or a warning. The unmarked envelope arrived at James's apartment exactly 1 week after the memorial service. No return address, no postmark, simply his name typed on the front, delivered by hand rather than mail. Inside, he found a hotel key card and a handwritten note in Thomas Walker's distinct penmanship: "Waldorf Astoria, room 1132. 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone. Destroy this." James studied the card, turning it over in his hands while considering the risks. His suspension remained in effect, his service weapon still surrendered to internal affairs. If this was a trap, he would be walking into it unarmed and without backup. Yet the alternative, ignoring what might be his only lead, was unthinkable. At precisely 8 p.m., James knocked on the hotel room door, tense for any response. Thomas opened it immediately, ushering him inside without a greeting. The spacious suite appeared to have been transformed into a makeshift command center, laptop screens displaying surveillance footage and documents organized in precise stacks across every available surface. Photographs and timelines taped to the wall in a pattern reminiscent of James's own investigation board. "I've been waiting for the right moment," Thomas began, securing the door with both the deadbolt and security chain. "I needed to be certain you weren't being followed." He gestured toward the assembled materials. "I took Harrison's case for a reason, James. I needed access." Understanding dawned gradually as James examined the documents, detailed records of Harrison's movements, transcripts of privileged conversations, and financial transactions that would ordinarily be protected under attorney-client confidentiality. "You've been building a case against your own client," James said, equal parts impressed and concerned. Thomas nodded grimly. "Since the beginning. After Caroline, I swore if I ever had the chance to stop someone like her killer." He trailed off, unnecessary to complete the thought with the evidence of his commitment surrounding them. "This violates every ethical canon I'm bound to uphold. I'll be disbarred, probably prosecuted. But I couldn't live with the alternative." The risk Thomas had taken was extraordinary, sacrificing his career, his reputation, potentially his freedom to gather information that law enforcement couldn't legally obtain. "Harrison isn't the top," Thomas continued, opening a secured laptop. "He's been protected by someone with enough influence to shut down investigations, falsify records, manipulate evidence." He pulled up a series of photographs showing Harrison meeting with Lawrence Eastman of Eastland Shipping, their conversation clearly photographed through a long-range lens. Harrison reported directly to Eastman, but even he was receiving orders. Thomas revealed the final photograph, Eastman deferentially greeting a distinguished older man exiting a private elevator. "Senator William Blackwood," James breathed, recognizing the powerful chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee. The implications were staggering. A sitting U.S. senator potentially involved in an international trafficking operation. Blackwood's committee oversees port security, customs enforcement, transportation regulations, everything Harrison and Eastman needed to operate without scrutiny. Thomas explained. In exchange, they provided financial support, manufactured evidence against political opponents, and handled personal matters the senator couldn't afford to be connected with. The revelation explained the extraordinary protection Harrison had enjoyed over the years, the way allegations disappeared, investigations stalled, witnesses recanted. It wasn't just money or intimidation, but governmental power being wielded to shield criminal enterprises. "Blackwood is untouchable through normal channels," Thomas said, anticipating James's next question. "But Harrison isn't. He's been in contact with me, seeking assurances about his legal exposure. He's scared, looking for options." Thomas slid a final document across the table, a secured location in rural Virginia where Harrison was currently hiding, awaiting extraction to a non-extradition country. You have 12 hours before he moves again. Make it count. Daniel Harrison's desperation was evident in his disheveled appearance when the joint FBI local tactical team breached the remote hunting lodge before dawn. Gone was the immaculate businessman from countless charity galas and corporate photographs, replaced by an unshaven but hollow-eyed fugitive surrounded by half-packed suitcases and multiple burner phones. He offered no resistance during the arrest, his expression registering resignation rather than surprise. James observed the operation from a command vehicle, still suspended but present as a consultant at the FBI's request based on his intimate knowledge of the case. Harrison's first words upon seeing him were unexpected. "I wondered when you'd find me, Detective Walker. Took you longer than I expected." The initial interrogation yielded little, Harrison retreating behind legal protections and demands to speak with counsel, though specifically not Thomas Walker, whom he now suspected of betrayal. The breakthrough came 36 hours into his detention. When evidence recovered from the lodge was presented, a laptop containing encrypted communications with Eastman detailed records of their operation, and most damning, a video call between Harrison and Senator Blackwood discussing the Sarah Parker problem 3 days before her disappearance. Faced with this evidence and the prospect of multiple life sentences, Harrison's calculated risk assessment visibly shifted. "I want immunity," he stated flatly to the assembled investigators. "Full protection, new identity, relocation." The FBI negotiator began the standard response about considering cooperation, but Harrison interrupted sharply. "You don't understand. If I talk, I'm dead. Blackwood has people everywhere, corrections officers, federal marshals, even your agency." His arrogance had dissolved into genuine fear, his hands trembling slightly as he continued. "I'm not the monster you think I am. I was brought into this gradually, compromised until I couldn't walk away." Over the next 72 hours, Harrison provided a comprehensive account of the operation's evolution beginning 15 years earlier when Blackwood, then a state senator with national ambitions, approached Harrison with a proposition involving custom importation permits for his transportation company. The initial arrangement seemed merely corrupt rather than criminal regulatory shortcuts, inspection exemptions, campaign contributions laundered through shell companies. But Blackwood's demands escalated alongside his political rise, drawing Harrison deeper into a web of blackmail and coercion. "The trafficking operation wasn't my idea," Harrison insisted during his 4th day of testimony. "Eastman approached me about special cargo shipments requiring discretion. By then, Blackwood already had enough to destroy me." Whether Harrison's portrayal of himself as a reluctant participant rather than enthusiastic perpetrator was accurate remained questionable, but his detailed testimony provided something more valuable: a comprehensive map of the entire criminal enterprise, from recruitment to transport to disposal. Most significantly, he provided the location of a private server containing blackmail material Blackwood had accumulated against dozens of officials, ensuring their continued cooperation or silence. When FBI cybersecurity experts accessed the server, they discovered evidence implicating judges, law enforcement commanders, customs officials, and politicians across multiple jurisdictions, the true extent of the corruption that had protected the operation for years. As the investigation expanded, disturbing connections emerged to similar operations in other regions, suggesting a network far larger than initially imagined. Harrison's cooperation offered a rare opportunity to dismantle not just one criminal enterprise, but potentially several interconnected operations exploiting vulnerable victims across national boundaries. Max's condition had stabilized enough for transfer to a veterinary rehabilitation facility, where James visited daily during his continued suspension. The German Shepherd's normally alert posture was compromised by bandages and an IV line, but his tail still managed a weak thump of recognition when James entered the room. The veterinarian was cautiously optimistic about his recovery, though uncertain if Max would regain the physical capabilities required for police work. James spent hours simply sitting beside his partner, sometimes reading case files aloud, but other times silently contemplating how differently events might have unfolded without Max's instinctive reaction to the suitcase that started the investigation. On the third day of Max's rehabilitation, as James was preparing to leave, the dog suddenly lifted his head, ears forward in a posture of alert attention focused on the doorway. James turned to find the hallway empty, but Max's intensity didn't waver, his gaze fixed on a specific point in empty space. The behavior reminded James of their visit to Sarah Parker's former room, when Max had exhibited similar focused awareness of something imperceptible to human senses. The facility's senior veterinarian, observing from the doorway, offered a gentle explanation. Working dogs often have heightened perception. Some detect changes in electromagnetic fields, others respond to subtle environmental shifts we can't perceive. James nodded, though privately wondering if Max's awareness extended beyond scientific explanation into realms he preferred not to contemplate too deeply. Later that evening, following another internal affairs interview regarding his conduct during the Harrison investigation, James returned to his apartment to find an unexpected package delivered to his door, a carved wooden box containing an antique silver whistle engraved with Max's name and badge number. The accompanying note read simply, "For when he returns to duty, --M.P." The gesture from Margaret Parker provided something James had begun to lose during his suspension, hope that both he and Max might eventually return to the work that defined them. That night, reviewing the expanded case files provided by Thomas despite ongoing restrictions on his official involvement, but James noticed a property listing in Harrison's financial disclosures that hadn't appeared in previous records, a remote cabin near the Virginia-West Virginia border, purchased through yet another shell company 7 years earlier. By Ken. The property didn't appear in any of Harrison's known testimony or the evidence catalogs from the hunting lodge. Its omission from Harrison's otherwise comprehensive cooperation struck James as significant. Though still suspended, he forwarded the information to the FBI task force, expecting it to be merely another financial hiding place or luxury retreat. The response came the following morning. Satellite imagery showed the property had been recently accessed despite its supposed abandonment, with tire tracks and disturbed vegetation visible from aerial surveillance. More concerning, thermal imaging detected a heat signature consistent with human presence inside the supposedly vacant structure. As federal agents prepared to investigate, James received an unexpected call from Captain Monroe. "Your suspension is lifted, effective immediately. The commissioner wants you on site when they breach that cabin." When James asked what had changed, Monroe's response was concise. "Max, the ballistics from his shooting matched an unsolved murder of a whistleblower in the Eastland shipping case from 3 years ago. Seems your dog got shot by a professional hitter connected to the organization you've been chasing." The revelation transformed what might have been merely another property seizure into something potentially more significant. The cabin might not be just another Harrison hideout, but a location important enough to protect with deadly force. The joint FBI local law enforcement operation to breach the remote cabin proceeded with methodical precision at dawn. The tactical teams secured the perimeter while negotiators attempted contact with whoever might be inside. James, observed from the command post, restored badge and service weapon, feeling almost unfamiliar after weeks of suspension. Despite the reinstatement, Captain Monroe had insisted he remain in an advisory capacity rather than participating directly in the raid. The standoff continued for nearly 3 hours with no response from within, despite thermal imaging confirming human presence. When the tactical team finally executed the breach, they encountered no resistance, just an elderly groundskeeper who had been maintaining the property in Harrison's absence. The man surrendered peacefully, explaining he had no knowledge of his employer's criminal activities, merely following instructions to keep the cabin ready for occasional use. Initial sweeps revealed nothing extraordinary: standard furnishings, well-stocked pantry, generator backup, a comfortable retreat rather than an operational center. And James felt a crushing disappointment until one of the FBI agents reported an anomaly in the floor measurements. The cabin's interior dimensions didn't match its exterior footprint, suggesting hidden space. Behind a bookcase in the study, they discovered a biometric lock requiring Harrison's fingerprint. After consultation with prosecutors, Harrison was transported to the site under heavy guard, his grudging cooperation secured with additional concessions regarding his eventual sentencing and incarceration location. The hidden room revealed behind the secured door contained exactly what Harrison had most carefully concealed, not additional evidence of his crimes, but documentation of his victimization by others. Meticulously organized files detailed how Senator Blackwood had systematically compromised Harrison through a combination of blackmail, bribery, and threats against his family. Most significantly, the room contained server backups preserving evidence that Harrison had been ordered to withhold during his cooperation, incriminating communications involving individuals even more powerful than Blackwood, extending into international diplomatic and financial circles. "This is why I kept it separate," Harrison explained as the evidence was cataloged. "Insurance. Because I knew they'd eventually sacrifice me to protect themselves." The scope of the conspiracy expanded dramatically with each file analyzed, revealing a network spanning multiple countries but involving officials at the highest levels of government and business. Within 48 hours, coordinated arrests began across 3 continents, dismantling not merely a single trafficking operation but an entire infrastructure that had facilitated human exploitation for decades. Senator Blackwood was taken into custody while attempting to board a private jet to a non-extradition country. His dignified facade crumbling as federal agents led him past assembled media. The investigation that had begun with a dog's reaction to a suitcase culminated in one of the largest human trafficking prosecutions in modern history, with over 60 individuals indicted across multiple jurisdictions. During the subsequent press conference, the FBI director specifically acknowledged James Walker and Max as the catalysts whose persistence had unraveled a criminal enterprise that conventional investigations had repeatedly failed to penetrate. 6 months after the cabin raid, Max's rehabilitation progressed beyond even the most optimistic projections. The specialized veterinary facility had employed innovative therapies, from hydrotherapy to laser treatments, gradually restoring strength and mobility to the wounded German Shepherd. James visited daily, participating in rehabilitation exercises and monitoring every incremental improvement. The journey from near death to recovery had strengthened the already profound bond between handler and dog, each seeming to understand the other's determination to return to work together. On the day Max was finally cleared for discharge, the veterinary staff lined the hallway in an impromptu honor guard, applauding as the German Shepherd walked out under his own power, still favoring his injured side but moving with growing confidence. Dr. Emily Bennett waited in the parking lot, having driven James to collect his partner. "He looks good," she observed, watching Max carefully navigate the short steps to the vehicle. "Better than anyone expected." James nodded, unable to fully express the emotion of seeing his partner returning to life after coming so close to losing him. The department approved his return to limited duty, he explained as they drove back to the city. "No field operations yet, but scent training, evidence review. Getting him back into the routine gradually." What James didn't mention was his own gradual healing, the nightmares that had plagued him since Caroline's death occurring less frequently now. The obsessive case reviews giving way to occasional evenings spent simply existing without the weight of unsolved crimes pressing upon him. The case had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand, opening possibilities for a life not entirely consumed by others' tragedies. At police headquarters, Max received a hero's welcome, officers pausing their duties to greet the returning K-9 officer with treats, pats, and the sincere appreciation of colleagues who understood exactly how close they had come to losing him. Captain Monroe had arranged a small ceremony in the briefing room, presenting Max with a special commendation medal that James attached to his service collar. "Not just for the Harrison case," Monroe explained to the assembled officers, "but for every case where his instincts led us to justice when conventional methods failed." James noticed Robert Parker standing quietly at the back of the room, his presence a reminder of all the case had cost and revealed. After the ceremony, Parker approached tentatively, still carrying the weight of his past failures but standing straighter now. A man finding purpose in the wake of tragedy. Margaret and I are starting a foundation, he explained, using Sarah's life insurance money and what I had saved for families of trafficking victims, support services, legal assistance, whatever they need. The initiative represented not merely financial support, but Parker's commitment to honoring his daughter's memory by continuing her work exposing exploitation and supporting survivors. Before leaving, he crouched to gently stroke Max's head, murmuring words too quiet for others to hear, a private acknowledgement between a father and the being who had helped bring his daughter's killers to justice, offering, if not closure, then at least the foundation for healing. The ceremony honoring the task force responsible for dismantling the trafficking network filled the department's largest assembly space. Representatives from multiple agencies gathered to recognize extraordinary service in an investigation that had exposed corruption at the highest levels while recovering dozens of victims still being held in locations identified through Harrison's testimony. James sat uncomfortably in the front row, Max lying at his feet, but both still unaccustomed to public recognition after years of working cases that often remained unresolved or unacknowledged. When the commissioner called James forward to receive the department's highest commendation, the assembled officers rose in standing ovation, not merely for the Harrison case, but for a career spent pursuing justice for victims who might otherwise have been forgotten. Detective Walker represents the finest traditions of service, the commissioner stated, shaking James's hand as photographers captured the moment. His refusal to abandon the investigation despite personal risk and institutional pressure exemplifies the commitment we expect from every officer. The ceremony continued with recognitions for other key contributors, including Emily Bennett's forensic team, the technical specialists who had decrypted Harrison's hidden files, and the international partners who had coordinated global arrests. Thomas Walker received no public acknowledgement, but his crucial role necessarily remaining confidential to protect attorney-client privilege technicalities that might jeopardize prosecutions. His sacrifice, a distinguished legal career ended by ethical violations that could not be publicly justified, represented a different kind of courage that few beyond James would ever fully appreciate. After the formal proceedings concluded, James visited the memorial garden established to honor Sarah Parker and the other identified victims. Margaret Parker was already there, tending the flowering plants that surrounded her daughter's plaque. "I thought I might find you here," she said without looking up, recognizing his footsteps. "Did they give you a shiny medal?" Her tone held no bitterness, only the gentle teasing that had developed between them through shared purpose in the aftermath of tragedy. "They tried," James responded, sitting beside her on the stone bench. He gave one to Max, too. He seemed more impressed with the treats afterward. They sat in comfortable silence, watching butterflies move between the memorial plantings. "Robert told me they're starting prosecution against Blackwood next month," Margaret finally said. "They want me to testify about Sarah." James nodded, understanding both the necessity and the pain such testimony would involve, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. "You don't have to do it alone," he assured her. "We'll all be there." The "we" encompassed the extended community that had formed around the case: law enforcement, victims' families, survivors, advocates who had transformed individual grief into collective purpose. Margaret smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes in a way James had not witnessed during their earliest interactions. Sarah would have liked that. She never wanted to fight her battles alone, just couldn't find the right allies until it was too late. As the afternoon light softened toward evening, a police dispatcher's voice crackled over James's radio requesting K-9 assistance for a possible missing person case. Max immediately rose to attention, ears forward, body language shifting from relaxation to readiness with practiced efficiency. James exchanged a glance with Margaret, who nodded her understanding. "Go," she said simply. "That's what Sarah would want for you to keep finding the ones who still have a chance." James and Max walked purposefully toward the waiting vehicle, their synchronized movement reflecting years of partnership. As they approached the scene where a young woman had last been seen, Max's behavior shifted, alert, focused, determined. James recognized the change immediately, trusting his partner's instincts just as he had that day at the airport when a seemingly routine baggage screening had unraveled a criminal enterprise. The work continued, as it always would, each case an opportunity to prevent another tragedy, to find another missing person before they became another memorial plaque. For James Walker and Max, the most fitting honor for those already lost was to save those who still could be found, one investigation at a time, but for as long as they were able to serve. In James and Max's journey, we find echoes of our own lives, the persistent pursuit of justice against overwhelming odds, the healing power of purpose after devastating loss, and the irreplaceable value of loyal companionship. As we enter our golden years, many of us carry unresolved questions and unfulfilled quests from earlier chapters of our lives. Sarah Parker's story reminds us that it's never too late to seek truth, and that our accumulated wisdom and determination can be powerful forces for good in this world. The connections formed through shared purpose between James and Max, Margaret and Robert, and all those touched by Sarah's courage show us that even in our darkest moments, a community becomes our strongest lifeline. Like Detective Walker, we may find that the deepest healing comes not from forgetting our past wounds, but from transforming them into meaningful action that protects others from similar suffering. Remember, our most profound legacy isn't measured in accolades or possessions, but in the lives we've touched and the wrongs we've helped to right. The journey continues one step at a time for as long as we're able to serve. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.